Ah, hola, bienvenidas, bienvenidos a este último día. Ha sido un poco maratónico, pero muy
Welcome everyone to this final day. It's been a bit of a marathon, but it's been encouraging and enriching.
presentado los y las investigadoras, activistas,
We've had great speakers,
hemos
researchers,
organizado
activists, artists,
tener dos paneles
and so today we're going to have
interesantes.
two panels,
Em,
and we're going to go ahead and get started.
también a los que nos siguen en YouTube.
So welcome everybody also following us on YouTube.
Al doctor Marty,
And I'm going
que es
to
una
give the word to Dr. Marty, give the floor. And then after that, we are going to give the floor to Ismael, who will be a moderator. Before we start, Doctor, remember the interpretation PSA. So before you start your presentation, the speakers, please disable the interpretation in the bottom right corner of your Zoom screen. You need to select interpretation and to turn it off. And for the attendees, you can choose the language that you want by clicking on the bottom right corner of your Zoom screen on the interpretation option. Thank you for your attention.
Gracias, Miriam. Go ahead.
Thank you, Miriam.
Adelante, Marty.
My turn? Okay. Thank you, everybody, and it's great to see people this morning. Let me begin with a few comments, mostly introductory and about today's colloquium day number 3, and then also what's next to come. So my name is Marty Otañez. I'm a professor and chair of the anthropology department at the University of Colorado, Denver. My work in terms of cannabis focuses on things like health and safety of cannabis workers, those individuals that devote their labor to the production and cultivation of cannabis. I'm also interested in corporate accountability, making sure global and national cannabis companies honor labor rights and don't harm workers. So that's another area of my research and creative work. I'm also a filmmaker. So in all of the research I do, I use video to share stories about narratives of work and labor and workers' rights. In addition, I have a community television show focused on cannabis called Getting High on Anthropology. So if anything, I think I'm looking at myself and all of you as resources for us to work together and understand cannabis research and creative work more, understand it better and in a more innovative way. So I'd like to begin thanking Cezanne, also my university, the Dean's Office and Office of Research Services at my university. That's the University of Colorado, Denver. I want to express my gratitude to the translators. These two offices in my university, the Dean's Office and Office of Research Services, are providing funds for the translators. So it's essential for me and the other individuals who are challenged to speak Spanish. So, you know, I say I still struggle with English. So to have the translators, it's a huge help. There's a number of people who've worked behind the scenes to make this colloquium happen. So I also want to thank Ismael and Claudia for the work that they've done. And I think it might be nice for each of us to get to know each other better. In the chat, put your name, your title, and the institution that you belong to, like the location also where you're at, because it's just good to see and honor and celebrate all the different people and places that are being represented in today's event. And if you want, also include any web links to any of your cannabis related work that you want to share. And so as we begin today, the third and final day of the network, I think it's good to emphasize that in my field of anthropology, we study culture, but we also create culture. So I think together we're creating cultures of destigmatization, cultures of social justice, cultures of innovative research and creative work that looks at cannabis locally, nationally, and globally. So this creation of culture together is something I really see as important, and I think we all can learn from each other about what we want this culture to look like, this emerging culture of cannabis and destigmatization. Also, what's important about today's event, we're going to be sharing work and innovative arts-based creative work, but also the event is to network with each other, to get to know each other and get to understand the direction where we came from, but also where we want to go with our work. So I hope we can also ensure that we focus on the social dimension of this colloquium. And then finally, the end result is an ongoing discussion that by the end of this year, we'll have put together 2 volumes of chapters that people contribute to that could maybe push the research and creative work that pertains to cannabis and destigmatization in new directions. So I'm really excited and I'm honored to be able to work with all of you. And like I said, I'm excited to learn about your approaches and then also what we can do together to create something beautiful about a new cannabis culture. So thanks again. I'm looking forward to the presentations today.
Gracias, Marty. Adelante, Ismael.
Thank you, Marty. Go ahead, Ismael. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to the 3rd day. We are going to get started with panel number 5. We're going to start with Estefania Velázquez Millán from the Oleaje Collective. Her topic is Cannabis, Feminist Journalism, an approach to the discourse of women that breaks stigma through artistic expressions. Estefania Velázquez Millán is an intersectional cannabis feminist. She studied communication at the UNAM and she works as a social media manager at KTVO agency. She's part of the Oleaje Collective since 2018 and she writes for their digital magazine since 2019. In 2020, she created the Cannabis section focused on cannabis feminist journalism. In 2020, she creates Sagri-Fro Feminist Prohibitionist Act. She is member of the network Making Joints, Making Fights. In 2016, she won the Acmic Stimulus, which she used for a Tlatelolco Carnival project. Her political activism is through the written word and content creation. Oleaje Collective is a physical and digital space focused on creating support among women and feminist literature that is accessible to all. So go ahead, Estefania. We're all ears. I'm not going to turn on my camera because my internet is really slow, so it would affect the presentation, but I will share my screen. Can you see it? It has the Oleaje logo. Yes, we can see it. All right, well, I'm part of the Oleaje Collective, as you heard. I'm going to start the presentation. The article is Cannabis, Feminist Cannabis Journalism, an approach to discourse of women that break stigma through artistic expression. So what are we going to be looking at? With this article, we want to analyze the textual component of journalism with gender perspective, and also the contextual component, which will show the cognitive and social factors, the conditions and consequences of feminist discourse, feminist, cannabis, and anti-prohibitionist discourse. Journalism acts by showing new discourses, its cultural historical context, and transform the hegemonic narratives and builds new discourses about cannabis consumption mainly. To look at this journalism closely, the proposal is to explore the problem through the concrete experience of the Oleaje Collective and its cannabis section. I'm going to talk about the context of the collective. Oleaje was formed in 2018 after the death of Leslie Berlin Osorio in the university, the UNAM University. Students from the philosophy and literature faculty decided to meet weekly to start our conversation. The sessions lasted for more than a year, and they shared and talked about personal experiences about being a woman and about the patriarchal violence affecting women every day. Among everything that was expressed in this space, the conversations in the Oleaje Collective, well, it was a healing space. A lot of times violence was discussed, violence that women suffer in spaces of consumption, whether that is the street, hanging out with classmates, this of uh, women also face police violence just because they are women and consumers. Violence in general. In 2019, the Oleaje Collective decided to use everything that they learned over a year of conversations and put it into a digital magazine, which you can see on screen right now. The design of the site, the graphics, the articles, social media management, and the editorial work is all done for women and by women. The main objective is to create spaces to share ideas and experiences with the goal of creating strategies to fight gender violence that we live every day. At the collective, we work together with empathy, understanding, and critique and thought. We identify in each of our experiences the problems and we create tools to combat the problems with the purpose of creating trusting bonds and friendships among women and safety networks. In 2020, the cannabis section was born, Cannabicas. It tries to break the patriarchal stereotypes that affect women who consume substances. It's a space that, with information and critique, seeks to politicize cannabis consumption in women. The articles in this section talk from an intersectional feminist perspective because we acknowledge the violence, discrimination, and oppression that women consumers of cannabis suffer and related to their belonging to different social categories like race, gender, class, ethnicity, disability, sexuality, and others. Women consumers experience violence that is different to what the men experience, and this section evidences these violences with that mainstream journalism doesn't cover. We also establish a feminist dialogue, and we give a space and a voice to the thoughts that happen that stem from local knowledge and identities and like the case of cannabis mothers and entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry. It is through journalism that we amplify the discourse of women that through artistic expressions break paradigms, everydays, and also stereotypes about cannabis smokers, women smokers. The main relevance of this article is multifaceted. First of all, there's the journalism, which documents the construction of feminist collectives and their action in the journalism world by showing the relevance of digital journalism with a gender perspective. Cannabis feminism, well, this analyzes the discourse as a political position in opposition with hegemonic narratives about women consumers. It's one of the few works about cannabis feminism in Mexico with academic rigor. It will talk about anti-prohibitionism because it shows the violence that prohibitionism exerted on women's bodies and how journalism can shift this paradigm. On the topic of women and counter narratives, this section is a space to amplify the voice of women who, through art, show their relationship with how they consume cannabis. This research will analyze their discourse to understand how they change the cultural, historical, and social context that involves them as consumers. It is a contribution to reivindicate all women who have been affected by the war on drugs. And finally, well, the methodology. To conclude the analysis proposed in this article or paper, we will work with ethnomethodologies, which considers the processes for understanding and representing the journalism. We will analyze the discourse and will compare articles from mass media, where many times women are treated as addicts or they are not trying to shift the paradigm. They continue to be stigmatized. So we will analyze this discourse, comparing articles from mass media and articles from the Cannabicas section. The analysis of the discourse will work only at the level of the thematic on or semantic macrostructures. With this analysis of the discourse, we want to investigate the systemic relationships between text and context to understand how they influence in cognitive processes, especially in producing and understanding the discourse structures and how these structures influence and are influenced by the social context. We will also carry out interviews. We will search for women who still suffer from the hegemonic paradigm in their thinking about cannabis women, and we will give them articles to read from the Cannabis section, and then we will interview them to analyze before and after they were able to read cannabis journalism with a gender perspective. And that is largely what the research is about. And I invite you to follow us on social media, the at Colectiva Oleaje on Facebook, the same on Instagram. And our sections are not just about cannabis, but there's about politics, culture, history. So I leave the invitation open for all of you. Thank you so much.
Muy bien, muy bien, perfecto. Muchas gracias,
Perfect.
Eh, Les recuerdo que pueden dejar sus preguntas en el chat, se hace en el Zoom o en el YouTube. Y al finalizar las
I remind you that you can ask your questions on chat and YouTube.
discusión, debates, etc. A continuación viene el maestro Evers Alan Landa Vargas de la UNAM.
Next, we have
De Onda. Es
Alan Vargas de la UNAM
en la FES Azcatlán UNAM. En la
from
división de
FESACatlan
comunicación
UNAM,
y
from
literaturas
the curriculum in communication and Hispanic literature
Es maestro
and other education centers. He
con una estancia de investigación en la University of Toronto.
studied at the University of Toronto and he studied movie production in California University.
Recibió el apoyo a través
He
de
got
científicos del INCINE, seleccionado a
and
participar en el
he
campo
worked
del
with the
Festival de
INCIME
Cine de
and he was
Guadalajara.
invited to participate in the Guadalajara Film Festival. He is writing a program for TV UNAM,
Su experiencia profesional incluye
and his professional experience includes organizations
22 y National
by
Geographic.
IMER Canal 22 and National Geographic. So,
Adelante, gracias.
Everest, you have the floor. Good morning. Can you hear me all right?
Sí, sí, Everest, adelante. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to share some slides with you. I'm not sure you can see them. Let me know if you can see them. If not, I'll continue. The idea of this talk is to analyze the literature, especially the literature called the Onda literature. I want to do a qualitative analysis that includes the social, historical, national, and international context where the work was developed, the location of the authors, who they were, what they did before they wrote those novels, and what they would do later. Review of the novels, of course, and the role of marijuana in the narrative apparatus and its relationship with the axiology and the style of the works. On the other hand, I'm also interested in, well, I start from this idea that the literature has the capacity to sublimate mindsets. This idea of the mindsets, that we need to understand them as a series of practices, beliefs, and values which can be reflected on different sources. And one of them is literature, of course, like Michel Boll said. And well, we can use this to understand the late 60s and the early 70s. And we will also be able to observe aesthetic and stylistic conditions common to these novels. Now, about the context. First, we're talking about the between the years 1968 to 1973, approximately. And the world back then was experiencing the Cold War and specifically the Vietnam War. So asking to reduce the government's bellicose campaigns. In France, we had a student movement, just like in Prague, with the Prague Spring, and in Japan, of course. So, in other words, globally, or at least in some points around the globe, the youth was reclaiming a space. The youth was reclaiming a new way of being. They rejected certain values from the previous generation, and this had repercussions in our country. So, what's going on in Mexico in 1968? We have the strike at the UNAM University, and then we had the unfortunate Tlatelolco massacre in 1968. This happened under the rule of Diaz Ordaz. It's a government characterized largely due to repression because of that act and other things that happened. And then the Olympics happened. And this is all included in the novels that I will be discussing shortly. Diaz Ordaz would later say that he felt proud of the decision that he made in 1968, referring to the Red October of the massacre. That fact would mark not just the social life, but the cultural life and the intellectual life, also journalism and the art in our country. So it's a paradigm in the national history, and then there would be elections, and Echevarria would win with a much more open discourse, more inclusive discourse, talking to young people. However, a few months later, a few months after he was inaugurated, then the Halconazo happened. It was a repression of yet another student movement by shock groups from the government. So this gives us a little bit of the context to understand how Mexican youths were living in this time. And finally, and this is related to the culture, between 68 and 73, we're talking about a period of 5 years. Well, culturally, rock was very important. The massive arrival of bands such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, among others, and they would impregnate the youth with this new spirit. So it would appear that people, and youths particularly, were reclaiming this new way of being. So, continuing to talk about the context and the literature, this is called the literatura de la onda. This is what the movement is called, or the wave. It was called this by an author and essayist who's still alive, actually, Margot Glantz. In this book, in this compilation called Young Narratives from Mexico, edited by Siglo XXI, she, as part of the team who made the anthology, she talked about how the generation could be encompassed under the idea of the onda or the wave. Some people say that the terminology was derogatory. She said that she didn't have that idea. It was just a word that was used a lot. When people would talk to each other, they would say, "Que onda," which roughly means "what's up," and also to mean a lot of different things. I'm going to give some examples. People joining us from other countries like the US and Canada, well, this word, onda, was like a phrase to say many things, including when somebody was dating. For example, when a couple was dating, they would say, we have an onda. Or when you're going to a party, let's go to the onda. Or we had a great onda yesterday, which means we had a great party. So as I reviewed the novels one more time so that I could have them fresh in my memory for today, I'm still in the onda. So what did Margot Glantz mean by the literature of the onda? Well, she wanted to give a title to this generation that was born in the 40s. Second, she wanted to discuss certain stylistic features that were common to these authors. For example, the inclusion of colloquial speak, of slang, of very youthful speech, and themes related to young people, such as party, sexual encounters, parties, and of course, experimentation with psychedelic drugs, among others. And then in 1971, Margot Glantz will talk again about this literature in an essay that she wrote. She talked about other short stories and other works that could be included in the literature of the onda. So what's the deal, or what's the onda with these authors? They were influenced largely from recent literature from the United States, especially by the so-called Beat generation, including Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, among others. These are were the most celebrated. And William Burroughs was a central image, somebody who was quite older than them. And the Beat generation was also called the Beatniks in a derogatory way. The term beatnik had a negative connotation associated with laziness, drug addicts, gangs, and all the negative connotations. However, the beatniks, or the beat generation, would refer to themselves as beats, not just because of the rhythm and beat, because they loved jazz, specifically bebop, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and others, but not just because of that, but as Ginsberg said, this word, beats, is about beatitude, about a series of writers who, through sexual experimentation and experimenting with drugs, wanted to have a kind of spiritual approach to the quintessence of the universe. They wanted to surpass their earthly qualities and approach the confines of the spirit. In that way, they were blessed or holy in a way. They wanted to overcome their flesh. For example, On the Road, a novel by Jack Kerouac, narrates how Marx, which is how he calls Allen Ginsberg, and Kerouac himself, they sit on a bed in the early hours of the morning, looking at each other face to face. They're taking alcohol and other drugs, including marijuana, and they're attempting telepathy. After many hours, they exchanged their thoughts about their experience, what they wrote. I'm sorry, the speaker froze. And then they traveled physically to Oaxaca to consume hallucinogenic mushrooms. And it was countercultural literature. And who are the Mexican writers of the wave or La Onda? We have Parmenides Garcia Saldaña is one of them. We also have Jose Agustin, René Avilés Favila, a writer who died recently, who left a legacy of novels. And he also studied at the Sorbonne University. Finally, we have Gustavo Sainz, who wrote a novel, and René Avilés, which could also identify his his novel called Tantabel, which with which he was identified for the under the La Onda literature. I'll talk about Garcia Saldaña a bit later. There are other authors, but this is the heart of the group of La Onda. I chose three novels that deal with the counter narratives in marijuana. The first one is Paso Verde or Green Step. It's the first novel from Parménides Garcia Saldaña. Green Grass, sorry. It was published in 1968, actually. It was his first novel. It entered a contest, but he didn't win. But it did catch the eye of the editors. Orlando Ortiz actually won the contest, a writer who has continued to publish short stories and editing books, teaching workshops, etc. So, what's the deal or the onda with the Pasto Verde or Green Grass novel? I'm going to start with the title, Green Grass. Well, the author alludes to this phrase often as a kind of idyllic space of peace. So he says, imagine you're talking to a girl on the green grass. And then he talks about other things. And then he says, the green grass is the quintessence of peace, of the place where you can just be without any social pressure whatsoever. So, green grass talks about a young man, Epicurio. It's a first person narrative. And he hangs out with a lot of people, he has a lot of friends, always or almost always under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, and other psychoactive drugs. The novel is a tale of all these happenings. It has certain precise stylistic qualities. First of all, yes, it does use street slang, curse words, and it has the capacity of creating a single word from many words, sometimes a single paragraph where it appears that it's just a single word, though it's actually composed of many different words joined together. The novel oscillates between Spanish and English constantly. It changes with no warning. Carlos Monsiváis, the writer, talked about this writer as the first Mexican writer born in the United States, because over half of the novel, we would have to make a quantitative analysis, but over half of the novel approximately is written in English, whether they're referencing songs by the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, or whether the author simply writes in English. He said, perhaps somebody will criticize me, but that's who I am. And in my mind, I sometimes think in English, and that's all I have to say about that. So to get an idea of the novel, and then I'll get back to what it says about marijuana and other topics, I do want to read a quote, which is a dialogue. Don't you want to get high? Don't you want to smoke? You're not with the onda, you're not with the wave, you're not cool. Which one? The club. That's, you don't want to smoke? No, I get dizzy. Oh, come on, don't be stuck up. You'll see. You'll see what's up. Lady of Spain smokes, and I feel odd. Okay, so they're inviting a woman to smoke marijuana, and they talk about the club Lady Jane, which is a song by the Rolling Stones, of course, which alludes to this. It's a reference to the female genitalia. The song is originally. So the novel, on top of the its like linguistic structure addressing sex and drugs, it's also a reivindication of the self. It takes a lot of examples from, for example, Kerouac and On the Road. It talks about Ginsberg and Howl, the poem. And it talks about the novel, The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald. The protagonist is always really high. And they talk about how his parents don't understand him, his family don't understand him because of the practices that he do. They call him a loser, a failure, etc. And he fights these ideas from the traditionalist, conservative, patriarchal society by using a series of arguments. And he sees himself as the king of this whole thing, and he says, I am the Onda. I am the incarnation of this new attitude. Parmenides Garcia, the author, I forgot to say, he was born in 1944 and he died in 1982. He also published other things and some journalistic articles. He was in jail. He spent time in psychiatric hospitals as well because he was aggressive. He was said to be a very violent person. While he was also wild and imaginative and fun, he was also prone to violence and he had a short fuse. I heard René Avilés say that, just to give you an idea of who Parmenides was, he told the story of how one time they were going to go see Hunter Grass on a lecture that he gave in Mexico. They tried to approach him as he signed autographs, and Parmenides sneakily approached. He took the whiskey that Hunter Grass was drinking and he stole it. And he took it to a party and he made a raffle. So the three of them were very young, they were drunk. So, just to give you an idea of who these people were. The next novel is El Apando, and I know that a lot of people will say this is not part of the Onda literature. And yeah, I completely agree. But if I'm allowed, well, José Revueltas, the author, will be a kind of guide or guru to these young men. Just like William Burroughs was to the Beat generation. So José Revueltas, like other writers, I forget the name of where they all met. It was a workshop from this author, Arreola, Juan José Arreola from Guadalajara. But José Revueltas was a tutor to this generation in terms of his revolutionary character. That's why I include this novel here. And in his edition, his adaptation or recreation for film, one of the Onda writers participated, Jose Agustin. So I'll talk a little bit about the novel El Apando and why I included in this analysis. Well, Jose Revueltas was born in 1914, and Manuel Maples Arce, a writer from another time, from the strident movement, he made a reference to José Revueltas because he was friends with his brother, Fermín Revueltas. And he says that José Revueltas was like a little mouse, always sitting in the corner without speaking, holding his book close to his body. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He was introverted. This young man, a passionate reader, lived with his family. Part of his family, for example, is Silvestre Revueltas, a classical music composer. His brother, Fermín Revueltas, and his sister was an actress. They're all from the state of Durango, but they live in the Roma neighborhood in Mexico City. And when Jose Revueltas was around 9 years old, his father died. So the family had to move from the Roma neighborhood, which was a very nice neighborhood, medium high class. They had to move to the Doctores neighborhood, which is a low class neighborhood. So Jose Revueltas was not able to go to private school. He had to go to public school from this point on. He had to live there with this other population. And this is something that is a little bit definitive of Jose Revuelta's career, and he will always be involved in some chicanery. He was put in jail 4 times, all due to political reasons, for organizing strikes, participating in political meetings. The last one, he was accused as being the intellectual author of the 68 movement. He was accused of mobilizing the young people, of putting ideas in their head. And he always said that was too much. He didn't deserve that much credit. And he said that the youth, they had their own ideas, their own impetus. The novel El Apando is the 7th novel by Jose Revueltas. Prior to that, he had made written other novels, like his first novels, The Walls of Water, which talks about when he was in prison, in a prison in an island. So that's why the Walls of Water comes from the title. He had other novels, short stories as well, and they always have this character that is very critical and bitter, rebellious, somebody who sees beyond the immediate reality, but always with a tinge of bitterness. And a character that doesn't quite find a space in in the world. And in the novel El Apando, Jose Revueltas talks about the jail within the jail. So I need to explain that the Apando is a minuscule jail cell compared to the other cells. It's a cell for punishment that existed in the Lecumberri jail, where he spent time. And people would be punished by being put in this cell. Please try to wrap it up, Everest. Okay, just a brief quote from this novel, where the characters are addicted to different substances, including marijuana. Well, I'm not going to read the quote. I'm just going to tell you. These people are desperate because they're in the jail, within the jail, but also in a mental jail. So they suffer terrible anxiety, and they get their partners to introduce drugs into the jail illegally. One of them even tells his mother to help him smuggle drugs into the jail. And then everything concludes, the conjugal visits, and at the end there's a revolt in the jail. It's very violent. There's a war of repression. And finally, another novel is It's Getting Late from Jose Agustin, who was born in 1944 in Guadalajara, but he is considered a native of Acapulco. He was a precocious author. When he was 16, he started writing with the Tomb novel, and this other novel is the third one. In it, he talks about several characters, specifically 2 central ones, Virgilio and Rafael. Virgilio is a dealer, a weed dealer, and other drugs, and Rafael is a friend of his. He reads the tarot, and he wants to get unstuck spiritually so that he can achieve a higher plane of existence and not feel guilty anymore for reading the tarot cards to his clients and lying to them. They It happens in the port of Acapulco. Virgilio is an allusion to Virgil from classic literature. He meets Gladys, Francine, and other characters with whom they'll have a series of adventures. They'll consume different drugs, basically marijuana, also alcohol, and they will also find their own demons. They will find their own loneliness and anguish, and which reflects the anguish felt in the society in 1973. So, as a way to wrap it up, I would say that these three novels, among others, well, they show us a new way of being in the world, a new entity, the young person. And youth is born out of this kind of literature in the time. They're saying, I'm not a child and I'm not an adult. I am something in between, an intermediate being that wants to be different, that seeks freedom, that seeks to identify with different practices like music and consuming drugs as a way to experiment with their own mind and their own spirit. So thank you so much, and I expect the questions.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias,
All right, thank you.
buena onda, por toda la exposición.
Thank you very much for everything you shared with
A
us.
continuación,
We will now
Paula
listen
Suárez
to
Ávila
Paula Suarez Avila.
con el tema
She was speaking about
a la rica marihuana, ensayos creativos de
creative
Estados Unidos.
essays for Yomi Marijuana. She's a full-time researcher from UNAM.
Es miembro del programa
She's a member of the higher education program. She teaches as the Faculty of Philosophy and Literature and the Political and Social Sciences faculty at UNAM. Creative essays from the US, Delicious Marijuana is the title. Hello, good morning, everybody. I feel very happy to be in this colloquium. Aaron, thank you very much for having invited me to participate in this very creative forum to speak about marijuana and perhaps some other drugs, I would say. The work that I'll be presenting here, of course, it's been an effort for several years now to try to understand the US counterculture, especially in the San Francisco region. So here I'll try to contribute about the destigmatization and all the culture that was created around drugs as of the end of the Second World War. I would like to start sharing my screen. Can I? Let's see. All right, so here are some slides. The title is based on a translation of a work of Terence Allen, a Texan writer who was born in 1924, and he started very young as a soldier in the Second World War. So throughout his lifetime, he developed a great amount of work as a writer, as a journalist, as a screenwriter in Stanley Kubrick team. He was one of the most important representatives of the counterculture of the US during the second half of the 20th century. So to give you some context and following up to what Ever said, this is really important because this is how we got the paradigms of the counterculture that I'll explain on this slide so that we can speak about the different definitions of it. There was an important ban of weed in the United States as of the 1930s as a system to prevent competition with other types of drugs. For instance, marijuana, during the 19th century, that's when it got first to the States. And it was meant for industrial use or some other medicinal use. But in Mexico, it was more widely used, especially in low-income areas. But in the 1930s, with the arrival of many migrants from Mexico to the US, the consumption increased. And some other groups started being criminalized, especially to regulate consumption and use as a toxic or psychoactive substance. During the 1950s, if we move forward in time, during that time, we also found a creation of new identities of young people who, in the creation of countercultural movements, especially those that oppose the war started by the US as of 1947, no, 1945, and with the beginning of some gruesome experiences that young people had to live because of the Cold War, including the Vietnam War. So the main objective of my work, which is going to be a collaborative work, is for those to speak about how those young people understood how important drugs were for them to survive the war. And it is also interesting to see how a term is defined. It started with the Greek pharmako. Pharmako, it's somebody from the Greek society. It was a term that was used to say to define a soldier who sacrificed his her own life. So this is how pharmaco or drug in this word was coined, and in the beginning it was understood that the pharmaco is somebody who would sacrifice their lives. So it was usually referred to or reserved for slaves or people with a handicap or a psychological disorder, and that were offered as a sacrifice for the times of the Greek. Now, the relationship there was with soldiers is closely related to the way in which they have been regarded. Soldiers in the US have been the largest consumers, and there has been a lot of experimentation with drugs after Second World War to see how this type of substances could be traded. Started with marijuana, obviously, and that's where the greatest consumption is, but there are some other substances that were created in US labs, like LSD, and this is what fueled the psychedelic movement in the US during the 1960s and 70s. Everest has already spoken about the relationship there was between a new type of literature, the new type of journalism, Terry Souther, the writer I am working with, lived during that period, and he's a bridge between the first beat writers after Second World War at the Columbia University, where they started experimenting with drugs and literature to find new grounds in the US. And this is something that also happened with Terry Souther, even though I found that there's some interesting traits acknowledged by the beat writers also, and by the new journalism. People like Terry Southern or Tom Wolfe, who wrote many novels on the movement, of a novel that is a classic for the hippie and psychedelic cultures, and that is the Adolf Huxley book, The Doors of Perception Open, and that gave the Doors its name during the 1960s. So further down the road, we'll also present a quote of the author himself about how he started relating by the half of the 20th century when he got to the States with peyote, mescalina, and how there were certain effects and things that he developed in his literature and how those drugs were experienced. This is important in the narrative because this is what I wanted to study, even though the Beats were the forefathers of the literature with representatives such as Aldous Huxley. The new journalism in the US, which is a term that was coined in 1968, is a genre that was created before that. There's usually a division about how, in critical studies, especially about this type of literature, Fernando Barat, for instance, he explains that there is a very clear division between literature and journalism starting the 20th century in the US that makes journalism to go following one line and literature on the other. But in reality, there are many young people who still want to do their literary practices, but end up being journalists. And there are many journalists who wish to write. So the main features of this type of literature in the US culture was the experimentation that Aldous Huxley took to the edge to document certain types of experiences of human beings regarding drugs. Now, something important that is worth mentioning about this type of literature is the use of metaphors, something that was used from a different perspectives, because metaphors not only help us to see the good things about literature, the positive sides, the aesthetic, the resources that can be within it, but also it can help in the social arena. For instance, an actor says, Winter, he's the author, he says that this literature uses metaphor as a tool of imagination for us to relate not only as human beings towards others or other things, and to appreciate and observe other objects. So the translation of certain words in this image you can see, for instance, this is the cover of the Doors LP, and below you see one of the covers of in Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. So metaphors are being used, especially in the visual field, as of narratives. So here, after this, a new way started for us to express psychedelia, but also human experience. And an important thing that Aldous Huxley makes, and by the way, Adolf Huxley is a son of a biologist, a very relevant biologist from England. So he does an experimentation of the relationship between biology and human beings and about the type of coping mechanisms we have. For instance, he proposes that drugs, even though medicinal herbs, which is a politically correct term, such as marijuana, have been used by different cultures all throughout history, in reality, the way in which the world it becomes addictive is when we consider that it is preventing a type of relationship, whether it's allowed or not to have in a society. So in this case, it seems to me that the reading of Aldous Huxley is essential for us to understand the phenomena of metaphor development. For instance, there is another thing that I find interesting about how to understand, how to interpret metaphors that could perhaps break the way in which we see conceptual systems, how we interpret reality by using reality itself. Aldous Huxley explained this in the book, and I'm going to present a very brief paragraph, but it affects the way in which we perceive reality, interpret reality. This in the 21st century has helped in the development of digital cultures, especially the computational culture that's going to be part of the conclusion. So this is a quote, and yesterday I was reading it so as to try to once again refresh my understanding of the literature from that time. I read Aldo, and he seemed to me very illustrative, the way in which he explained in the Dose of Perception his transition towards the use of peyote, mescaline, and how he started recording. He used a person ask questions as if in psychotherapy, what are you feeling? But in reality, he is the one who's having this conversation, even though it is presented as if it was a conversation between two people. It was a monologue. He says the change happened when he started using this drug. There was not something revolutionary, but after half an hour, in the beginning it was not revolutionary, but after half an hour, he started to realize that there were golden lights. And from then on, he explains what he observed based on this new type of reality that is offered to him by peyote. He said that he saw a lot of red surfaces that were expanding from different modules, vibrant, throbbing modules whose life is being extracted. He refers to the idea of getting out of human being, reaching ecstasies, and to ecstasies for him is to understand the creation of the world from the Catholic perspective, the arrival to heaven, getting out of the body to get to heaven. Happy World is another important iconic book for the contemporary world, in which he speaks about the mechanization of robot human beings, and also which is an important influence that he had from Asia. It is reflecting upon the way in which human beings can transition. There are some very important reflections about the beats here. I don't have time to explain, and this has been already discussed, but some of the influences were William Burroughs. They started the movement, as I said, in 1944 with Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. They started traveling, especially to do land recognition, reconnaissance of how drugs are used. And this is the map of the On the Road, the Young Kroc famous novel. This is the trips that they took in different directions, and how many young people follow this route, the 66 route, or follow this type of traveling through the US and Mexico to get into a new culture, such as the Mexican culture and the other cultures that they found on the way, especially the relationship they have with indigenous groups in Mexico and the US. So this is how the movement started, and it started along with the Cold War. So they suggested that the Cold War was a very mechanical way of living life, and that they, as well as the hippies and some other groups, which I'll explain later on, they criticized Cold War as a type of technocracy in which human beings are attempted to be made robots, mechanical, and it's another way in which they are being transformed into a military state. The relationships, interpersonal relationships, everything is being controlled. They want to reinvent life itself during the Cold War to create a new model to understand reality through those new experiences between journeying, drugs, interpersonal relationships. Terry Southern is the bridge, according to Tom Wolfe, who is one of the great representatives of new journalism, the bridge between the beat generation and the hippies. He was left in a space of the middle road. He wrote a book that's called The Marijuana Path. The cover is quite fun. It's a picture of San Francisco in the 1969. And he is a text and writer who is rescuing different aspects. When he came back from the war, he started writing. He went to Paris. He learned a lot about journalism there. And his work was very well accepted by Americans. He's considered to be one of the authors, if not one that was constructing a new culture, but he was a good analyst, and from a humoristic perspective, he would critique the culture. He's considered to be important in that role. Marijuana from the Redland is a communication that he had with an African American in a crop field, and how the young person got to know marijuana or weed, because apparently for this character, this is the best type of weed you can get, the one that comes from Redland. There are some other contributions of Terry that I also find very interesting, such as the Doctor Strange movie, or How to Stop Thinking About Bombs. And at the end, he connects with Stanley Kubrick in this concept. That is how he's acknowledged. Even the Beatles, in their famous cover of Sgt. Pepper, you see the great icons of cultural transformation there, the psychedelic culture during the 60s. So within all of those symbols on this group of people, you see Terry Southern along with Alon Sushi. So there's acknowledgement of them. And there will also be other important participations, even though he's a screenwriter, there are many screenwriters in these movies. The Easy Rider as the mother man, which is another way in which they are reflecting about what's happening in the States, as well as the Barbarella movie, where he participated, as well as Super Bionic Woman, where they created the space of, in the universe. Those are movies that are highly recommended you watch. This is a brief fragment of the discovery of marijuana for a youngster. Harold is an African-American boy who works in Texas crops, and he goes and visits the fields, and he asks, when or how can I get a taste of this? And I am not going to spoil the ending. It's only 5 pages long, this story, but it is a very fresh, easy story to read. And by those stories, you can understand the new interactions Americans had. And there's another story that's very good. It's You're Way Too Hipster. It's in the same book. It also speaks about the experience of hashish by groups of Americans who are playing jazz in Paris. And there's an interesting combination of hashish Arab groups and the type of smuggling that took place in the 50s in Paris. Here are some other of the contributions of Terry Southern when he collaborated with Stanley Kubrick. You have Terry Southern is the one that introduced the novel of Mechanical Orange to Stanley Kubrick by Anthony Burgess, an English author who's traumatized because of what he saw in his colonialistic campaign in Asia. And he speaks about the colonial violence that still persists in the movie The Mechanical Orange. And at the end, Stanley Kubrick adopted that screenwrite. Words such as queer, that very important now in the US culture, started there explaining things that are unusual, weird in US culture or the British culture as well. You only have 3 minutes left. So I'm going to skip to speak about other of the writers, Tom Wolfe. I'm going to forget about Terry Southern for the time being. Tom Wolfe, who acknowledges Terry Southern's contributions, and he created a novel that is called The Ponche de Acero Lisérgico, LSD Punch. And he speaks about the life of the band and the leader of the band that really existed in the US. They created a new model to oppose the mainstream of American culture, using an alternative culture and with the ludic use of this type of substances. Ken Casey wrote, and before he did, speaking about Tom Wolfe's book, The Further Trip, the trip they took on the band in their bus, he wrote another book which will become later the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest movie. Jack Nicholson starred on that. And he spoke about how many men in the US enter mental institutions and the connection that had with drug experimentation and how the US and Stanford University experimented with people. Ken Kenzie makes an important contribution to the American culture, but not only that, the drug culture, but also the culture of the new organizations at the end, that is the target of this type of groups to create a new community and a social organization. For instance, they organized parties that were called the trip festivals in San Francisco. You can Google them and to see what they were about. And this is how they introduced a new scene of jazz and rock music. This is during the 1960s. And here are some of the posters. I will also explore a bit about this. But it's said that the Trip Festival was a way in which the counterculture movement of the hippie culture developed when it started with this type of Trips Festival movement. And this is how new ways of cultural production started. Amongst this, we can mention experimental music, the creation of dance companies, experimental theater, and other types of entertainment. This will be part of the conclusions. There is an important contribution, as a matter of fact. Several of the people who have contributed to this type of culture, especially to the creation of the new visual culture, space culture, and the relationship with of the world with men, of the world of men with the universe rather. Brad published the last the last World Earth catalog. It was a pamphlet, and Steve Jobs and other Milbar creators found in this inspiration for the current cyberculture in the US. And basically, this has also spread throughout the world. And it was a way in which to explain the culture of the hippies and how in the 1960s the hippies had moved to other places to create a new culture that was based on a new type of community, as they call it, and in a new type of, it was a critique against the mainstream of the American dream. And for all of this, the contribution of experimentation, such as the Kinsey group, the Beats groups, as well as from other people who criticized the American culture, especially under the framework of the Cold War period. Anyway, this is all I have to share today. There are many things we could discuss about the 21st century, how communities or societies are being organized and producing literature and things, so many things to speak about, especially gender relationships and the creation of new spaces and of other understandings of the world. For instance, the creator of this pamphlet, the fanzine, which was the basis for Google, or what we do with platforms, he said, why can't we observe the world? So he decided to take pictures from above, and he decided to communicate what this reality looked from above, a communication that is very basic, very popular, and based on community values according to what he proposed. So those are the creating elements that they brought to the table. So I thank you for your attention.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Paula.
Perfect. Thank you.
A continuación,
Now,
el proyecto TriSpace,
the TriSpace project,
integra la maestra Lorena
formed
Emilia
by
Paredes
Lorena Emilia
González
Paredes
Moreno,
González from the ENA,
licenciado Víctor Tonatiu
Víctor
Martínez Moreno
Tonatiu Martínez
y
Moreno,
licenciado Juan
and
David César
Juan David
Jiménez,
Cesar
con el
Jiménez.
tema En una calle del
The
este,
topic
la
is On a Street in
construcción
the
contra
East, the
narcotráfico
construction of
a
marijuana
través de
counter-narratives
ejercicios
through artistic
expresionistas.
activities on public spaces.
Entonces, le cedo la voz. Bueno,
So you have the floor.
gracias.
Thank you, Israel. Thank you, everyone, all of the organizers, for including us and allowing us to be here. Good morning. I am Lorena Paredes, and together with my colleagues, Juan David Cesar y Tonatiu Martinez, we will present this On a Street in the East, the construction of marijuana counter-narratives through artistic activities on public spaces. First of all, I'd like to talk about where this talk comes from, and which will become a chapter of the book. It's part of a research project. Youths that consume marijuana on public spaces in Mexico City is the title, and it's part of the International Tri-Spaces project. We're a multidisciplinary team, which lets us gather information with different techniques. For example, multimedia and photographic material, which we will show today, and it's all produced by Tonatiu. The work in general relies on the basic principles of collaborative research, construction of knowledge in collaboration with the youth people who are the study subjects. But where do we do this field work? Well, for 3 years, we arrived at this point in the city in the east, and we work at the El Salado street market. You can see it here in yellow. It takes up more than 3 kilometers and 3 subway stations, incidentally, and it's in the Iztapalapa borough of the city. It borders the Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl municipality of the state of Mexico. It's located in a strategic place, so hundreds of people visit it every Wednesday. Inhabitants of the area and people from all over Mexico City and the state of Mexico. In this street market, you can find a broad range of used goods, called in Mexico chacharas. And you can also find new clothes at low costs, furniture, food, and a lot more. People say that you can find basically anything. This street market is also visited by young people who use marijuana and other drugs or non-illegal substances like alcohol, but whose consumption in the public space is considered a transgression. Our chapter, titled On a Street in the East, refers to the research area, this green dot here, and the yellow square is the faro. So our research point is right outside that, the faro, and around the Don Celso pulques, about 50 young people gather every Wednesday. They share a joint, some pulque, and they also engage in an artistic exchange. There are both men and women, but there are more men. And they call themselves street artists. And for years, they have taken the public space, the street, as a place of expression. Since 2018, they have been interested in presenting artistic proposals around using cannabis. They address important topics for them like the criminalization of consumers, prejudice, the identity as young people, among others. And all of these counter narratives can be seen, read, and felt in their artistic expressions. So here we have a picture of Don Celso, our dear Don Celso. This is the point where the people gather. This is the faro. These are the young people sharing. And then these two photos of the left are the street markets. There are established places and some just on the floor. So to recap a little bit about who are undertaking these processes and who are these youths? Well, they are street artists, cannabis users. They are concerned about the social transformation, as they call it. And we also have some people who have taken workshops at the Faro. So up to a certain point, they have a link to the Faro. And something interesting here is that they have formed their own collectives. So sometimes the dynamic is not just individuals, but rather sharing among different collectives. And there are also people who, although they may live very far away from the meeting point, every Wednesday they arrive, they go there to share, but they also are looking for a safe space to consume cannabis because they are next to other consumers, and this reduces their perception of the risk. Now, Tonatiu will continue. I am going to talk a little bit about two of the projects that are linked to the TriSpaces research project. One of them, as was mentioned on Tuesday with Dr. Angela, is the La Lucha, or the Struggle project. It's an open mic and free stage for any kind of artistic expression where urban artists, mainly from the east of the city, exercise their freedom of expression, and it generally happens in public spaces from marginalized areas. Here specifically, we are in the El Salado street market, but this is a project that involves other marginalized spaces from the periphery of the city. Each struggle has a social theme which tries to raise awareness, for example, about the illegality. Hello? Okay. Or the struggle for those who have been forgotten. Irene Flores, for example, says the first time this started, it was a free poetic fight. But within this, there was an open mic and a free stage, so everybody took the opportunity. The second time, it was no longer just a free poetic fight, it was the fight or the struggle. They're fighting for the public space, and it is what you exercise and is the awareness of having reached this point. This is a quote from Irene Flores, who is part of this whole project. And in the street market, there's also a project called the East Marijuana Encounter, which links collectives and encompasses different themes related to marijuana and to the neighborhoods in the East. It's a space devoted to promoting artistic expression and specifically denouncing arbitrary detentions, broadening the knowledge about the plant, and there are also programs about risk reduction and harm reduction related to consumption. As you can see in the picture, a lot of people attend. Some days it goes over 50, 100, 150 even. Other days there's fewer people. And within these two dynamics, these two projects, they try to promote the neighborhood, and the young people are the ones who participating this taking of the public space. They exercise artistic disciplines like graffiti, dance, performance, juggling, and people use these tags a lot to decorate the street and the graffiti as well. There are also many workshops. So as you can see, there's a lot of artistic expression. And now David will talk. Thank you, Tona. So as my colleague said, to recap, these young people are usually street artists, definitely often living in precarious condition or with a lack of opportunity of participating in formal cultural institutions. Most of them use cannabis and they live in the east of the city, Nesa, Iztapalapa, and Iztapaluca. As Lorena said, many of them carry out workshops at the El Faro, so many of them engage in cultural activities. These projects that Tona mentioned are mainly self-managed, and they choose to use a public space for their cultural activities and to present counter-narratives around cannabis use. They generate and they propagate information to users to demystify the use and to share their experience with the plant. Next slide. Like Irene said, well, the objective of the artist having a space is, well, because I, as an artist, think that it's very hard to find spaces to be able to show you and show your work. A lot of people go to more centric areas, but it's very hard to get a space there. I think you should try to find a space in your neighborhood, in your community. That's it. The second thing is that the public space has to be enjoyed not just by an audience who are artists, but just a kid that might be at the market or a lady who is just there to buy something. It's about the communion, improvement, and the message. So Irene talks about the relationship with the people of the street market beyond just the artists and their consumers. It's about interacting with the people of the community at large who go to the street market and witness the activities. Now I'm going to show you a video shot by Tonatiu. It's rap by Christian. He's a young person who goes to the space often and does graffiti and rap. There's no audio in the video. There's audio now, but it's not very clear. Another, he's talking about the activities that they do. He mentioned juggling. I managed to pick up. He talked about the police as well. Drugs. It's hard to make out most of the words.
No sé si alcanzaron a escuchar bien, pero en
I
el
don't know
video
if you managed to hear very well, but Christian is rapping in the video. You can see the group of youths who usually gather there. And in his presentation, he talks about artists who are underpaid because of prejudices. For example, he talks about the culture, about juggling in the parks, graffiti in every corner, the Museum of Hunger, the policeman who is aggressive, they shoot to kill. Don't get confused. I'm not a robber. I just engage in my passion and I want to make my neighborhood a place of good actions. Good actions. This is a rap from the sewers. So basically, he's trying to make visible certain situations that they experience of people from that neighborhood in the East. He talks about how they get discriminated for being street artists from because of how they look, and he highlights the precarious violence conditions and police abuse. Next one. This is another fragment from a video, a performance by Irene Flores, who hosts the La Lucha event. This is called Closet Marijuana. It happens also at the El Salado Street Market. This happened in 2018. You are rapists? Oh no, when I see stoners, I get scared. I'm scared of stoners. They say the stoners are the worst. My mom said it. My mom. Always criticizing people. My mom. Always say, no, no, no. The drunk, the rapist, the stoner. The rapist is a stoner. The stoners shouldn't be here. Why do you smoke? You're hurting yourselves. You're harming yourselves. You're too young. It hurts you. Guys, don't smoke. You're young. You have all your lives ahead of you. Don't do this. You should get a job. This lazy guy, he just laughs instead of working. He should be working. You should be working. You don't even know what you're doing. So in this video, as you could see, Irene was performing. She's dressed as an adult woman who is who has stereotypes that adults usually have about young people who are marijuana consumers. She criticizes their consumption, where they are, how they dress, even the work that they're supposed to do, but they don't do. Her colleagues are street artists. So in this monologue, she talks also about formal work a little bit. And at the end of the performance, she says that she also likes to smoke cannabis, but it's closet marijuana smoking. She doesn't want to be seen consuming because she doesn't want to be judged, but she does judge those who consume it freely. This is a character that she's portraying. And, you know, it's a way to start the discussion. Irene has other characters that she portrays. And it depends on the theme for the event, but she has different sketches that she does. Next slide. So, conclusions. After these years working on this space and working with the youths, we've seen that they are trying to create a safe space through art and culture and to strengthen the social relationships in the community. Because as I said before, they want to be visible to the community. They want the people who go to the street market to be able to see them. It's not just a way to recreate or have a good time and socialize. Certain situations to improve the stigma that they suffer as street artists and consumers. And they also want to promote cannabis regulation with this kinds of events like the East Marijuana Encounter. They also want to strengthen the community between artists from the East and promote these spaces as a place to foster belongings where they can express themselves artistically and culturally and to promote social and political critique. And quoting Fernanda, member of a collective that usually goes to this space, well, she says, I discovered that them, referring to members of her collective or other people gathering there, also consumed marijuana. So I felt accepted. I said, okay, I don't have to hide here. I don't have to hide who I am. On the contrary, that made me stay because I could have those things. I could relate my marijuana consumption with the power to express myself and fulfill my creative vision. So thank you so much for your attention.
De igual manera, cerrando esto,
So
aquí
to close,
también tanto las fotografías y videos que fueron
so
también mías.
the photos and the videos were taken by me. This is one of the
En el
posters
metro de la Ciudad de México se
in the
cometió
subway
un
in Mexico
delito
City when
de
there
revisar a
was
los
an
usuarios
operation
y ahora sí que
to basically
con los perros.
frisk the users and
Se viene
search them by using the
extorsión
canines. It
y
says, welcome to the
una
capital
frase
of
que dice la
extortion.
policía, ¿no?
And a
Saca
phrase
tus
that
cosas y
police
vámonos, que este es un
usually tell
ejercicio
you,
de
you know,
rutina.
take out your stuff because this is a
También
routine check.
es importante para nosotros,
It's also important
como
for
barrios de
us,
Oriente, como barrios marginados, vivir y resistir
and
también
it's important
desde
for us
siempre.
marginalized people
Y
to
pues de igual manera
exist and become
buscarnos en
visible.
nuestras redes sociales,
So
tanto
these
en
are our social
Facebook, Try
networks.
Spaces Digital, en Instagram,
Try
y
Spaces
también
Digital. This
Facebook
is Instagram.
personal.
This is my Instagram
Y
user,
también les vamos a dejar aquí
AHFTKD.
en el chat una
And
lista de
I'll
reproducción
also give you
de música
access
hispánica,
to a playlist
de una
and links
videoserie que tengo, ¿no? Que se llama
to
El Barrio
websites.
Vive, ¿no? Que a
This
través de
playlist
mis
is a video series that I have that is
artistas
called The
canábicos
Neighborhood Lives.
del Oriente expresa su
10
arte.
expressions of
No sé si alguien
artists
más
in
quiera agregar
cannabis in
algo,
the East. I don't know if
algo más.
somebody else wants to say
Si no,
something
pues
else, or that's it.
Thank you, Tona. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, guys.
Sí, muchas gracias al proyecto Price.
We thank the Three-Piece Project. Now, we will hear about another project, Terraza Agura. Dulce Maria Tapaguirre from UNAM is a part of that. Alichen Moreno Aguilar from UNAM as well. And Victor Lopez Garcia from UNAM as well. They were speaking about the construction of a cannabis gardening from the Global South.
Listo, buenos días, ¿cómo están? ¿Sí se escucha? ¿Y si se ve mi pantalla, perdón?
Sí, todo bien.
Can you hear me? Can you see my screen? Yes, everything is in
Listo.
order. Excellent. So here's my presentation. First of all, we would like to thank Mr. Aaron, the UNAM University of Denver University for the invite and for the last 2 days presentations. And we have been hearing to everyone with a lot of interest. We are Terraza Agüera. We're a cannabis gardening project that we're proposing from the South, Global South. And our purpose is to break the stigma in a contemporary way. As we have been hearing before, Evers, who spoke about the literature of the 1960s literature, and then Paola, she also spoke about the stigma around it. We believe that's been a transgenerational stigma in which the youth, young people have been questioned by the use of marijuana from a hegemonic position. And this is the construction that allows at the same time to have a certain introduction of other policies, economic and social policies. At Serraza Huera, we believe interdiscipline. We believe in the connection of different disciplines working together. And from this perspective, we're trying to connect the knowledge that they have of social sciences, exact sciences, with human science and the social sciences we have on this side. Something interesting that it's worth saying is that they came with the concept of the era of the Anthropocene. This is a concept that from the social sciences perspective is also being used in the sense that we are accelerating the destruction of the planet. And in this sense, we started making a critique.
Y como romper esta...
And in order to break the stigma and to break the capitalistic culture that is killing us, we created our own self-cultivation network, a 420 from our own trenches. For instance, now the marijuana is about to be regularized, legalized. This is influenced by the global north concept of the grower. They have certain intentions, they have their own context to want this, even considering climate matters or weather matters. But here in Latin America, the context is different. The weather is different, our history, the violence that we suffer, the cultural domination that we suffer is quite different. So the intention is to construct it, customizing it. This is Terraza Huera. We are 3 people. And I pass the floor to Dulce Marihuana. Hello. Thank you, Vic. In Mexico, we have faced a context that, along with the follow-up and policies for capitalistic development of the free market, little by little, the public institutions have been dismantled, especially health, education, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, development personality, those are under attack. And in this context, this is where Terraza Huera was created, a project that has been working for 6 years. And it was created because of the need of provide an immediate solution to different diseases of our relatives and friends. During these 6 years of construction, we have created cannabis gardening culture that goes well with the needs that I have explained. And one of our main objectives, and also personal objective, was to communicate and to share the real nature of cannabis as what it is, a plant that has different uses and medicinal, therapeutic, recreational, industrial, ornamental purposes. Its biological value is very high. But due to its illegal nature, users for a long time, we all together have created a brotherhood, sisterhood between different types of consumers, creating alliances all throughout Mexico and even across borders, virtual, digital borders, as well as physical borders with the South, like in the case of Colombia, it is there. We have shared with other cannabis cultures, other social contexts from other communities about the cultural diversity that can share a different type of knowledge. And with this, we want to contribute with the fight so as to have a life free of discrimination and to get rid of the patriarchal domination, capitalistic models that have so oppressed us. Pass it back to my sister. In Terraza Huera, we get organized to meet a network of cannabis growers so as to stop having the same old concepts of marijuana users and to create a new identity. Cannabis has been part of the history for the last 10,000 years. And whether or not it's considered to be legal, many people are growing the plant with different methods all throughout the world. By showing that users of cannabis, we have been people who are committed with self-care and the well-being of our land and communities. That is why 6 years ago, I decided to create my own lifestyle around which art and managing my own time and spaces have allowed me a transformation of my priorities. So this has been one of the best experiences of my life. So I'm not selling a product, but creating a collaboration with people who trust in my skills, and we share the same objective. So we create clothing, one that is very authentic. Everything is handmade by national Mexican artists like myself. And my purpose, our purpose, is to create textile methods to with biodegradable materials and without the intention of exploiting others. So right now I'm using threads from different materials such as cotton that are massively produced and are degrading the ecosystems of our countries to satisfy our needs. Because of this set of circumstances, I decided to start growing with the razahuera other types of crops so as to transform my plants into hemp threads so as to replace monocrops such as cotton and to stop polluting water with artificial dyes and to use more natural dyes that are obtained in a better way handled in Mexico. Once we get the hemp clothes, the advantages are that it's hypoallergenic, it grows quick, and it doesn't require so much care. It doesn't contain PHC, and the fibers can be used also for biofuels, for lubricants, for many other activities, and it is highly resistant. It has a high content of cellulose that is lower than that to cotton, 60 and 80%. The fiber is also more durable and it's lighter for the clothes that we can create. For the last 100 years, and with the ban of hemp that was closely related to marijuana as well, it made it difficult for textile users to be present. But now there is a reactivation of hemp growth. However, if we don't do this carefully, we could transform it in another type of monocrop, and that's not something we want. Therefore, in order for us to achieve a revaluing of hemp, it is not necessary to have massive growth because it has to be accompanied by a new cannabis culture that understands the true needs of our lands and communities. Finally, I would like to say that cannabis has been an important help in my life and inspiration because all of the old ideas that we had when I studied biology and not fashion style, I was able to transform that into different types of uh, creative arts that have been taken to a different level with the current society. And especially this is something I do for women because I want women to feel more comfortable and have less threat of suffering breast cancer because of the use of uncomfortable bras. But this is also for men, for people who would like to explore other self-expression means, and this is the purpose of what we do. Thank you very much. Yes, if we consider that science is meant for the population, not only for scientists, at Terraza Huera, the cultivation of cannabis has opened the doors for us to make this, from this activity, a way in which we can grow our knowledge along with the experimentation and the exchange of scientific and empirical knowledge. And by using culture, the cannabis culture as the common thread, the integrator, starting from the growth and by taking advantage of all of the components for medicine, use oils, ointments, and anything. We use different methodologies to communicate and to share its usefulness, especially in cooperating with our autonomous projects in artistic or cultural activities to modify the negative stigma that marijuana users receive, using music and language as a collaboration with podcasts such as Chambeando and Maconio Pizza, in which we spoke about sound experimentation and friendlier language. We created audiovisual materials for Instagram in which we also experimented with pictures, movies, drawings, and our clothes so as to destigmatize the use of cannabis and by inviting people from the music industry, especially hip hop artists, because we love rap. All of us, we love rap. in that their art is creating a new collective imaginary of cannabis meanings. And we are also trying to delete the line between scientists and marijuana consumers by creating a unifying concept and by breaking the negative stigma that have surrounded cannabis consumption. Likewise, we are looking to make the role of women more visible, not only as consumers, but also as growers, which is something that has increased, and in the past it was all male dominated. In this search to create integration and visibilization of the cannabis world that has been very male oriented, we are trying to create safe female places for consumption and for exchange of ideas, and for those women who grow and consume the plant to promote its use of this ancestral beautiful plant that is cannabis. Now, Victor, who will speak about the collaboration work we do. Well, as she said, what we are trying to do in this project is to work with different types of ethics, different to capitalism. Instead of being individually oriented, we want collaboration. Instead of competing, we want to construct together with others. So this is how we conceptualize that we can break the stigma of the marijuana culture, something that has lasted for 100 years, that was imposed on us. We were stigmatized, criminalized in a very cruel and selfish way. And so we are resisting, and we're trying to find new ways of having creative resistance to build ourselves in a different way. And in this case, in Latin America, where an opportunity is being opened because of the pandemic, because the states don't know what's happening, even if it's below their noses. And there's also the legitimacy crisis. And because there's a new stage of capitalism, the virtual bubble has burst, and let's see what they'll try to do now. That's what's happening with cannabis. They think that they can use our cannabis as another commodity that they'll sell. And this is a cultural idea that is still sold from the North. And the more we accept it, the less we will accept that the idea that marijuana has to follow certain economic, political patterns that are sold to us. It doesn't have to be that way. We have our own cannabis culture network. And so not only the people who grow the marijuana are part of the network, there are some other people who have different businesses and knowledge and skills, as Marina said, and that have shared with us other type of knowledge. Here we have one that at some point we did something that was called a project for providing bicycle tools and how to fix your bicycle. We would go out, smoke marijuana, we would go to certain spaces, people would play music, we had workshops, we had different conversation exercises, and we started breaking the stigma before Terrazahuera. We have some of the members who have collaborated and still collaborate with us at Terrazahuera, such as Emmanuel, who is a grower who has great ideas. And he is not so much of a grower with us, but he has intention, and he has very important perspectives. He is also making some critiques to capitalism. And this is how we will start constructing as of the use of the arts, because we also believe in that greatly. Flor de Gallo, Ruben are here with us. They've taught us a lot about agriculture. And you have a psychologist here who's also an expert in herbs. And from a different perspective, he's also adding to our cannabis project. We see one of the cartoons that Emmanuel draw. And this is how we're trying to make people feel that you need a lot of money to invest to do this. This is we're proving that small gardens can be self-sustainable. We have an Instagram account, Terrazahuera. You can follow us there. We do performance videos in which we use disguises. We use some sort of differential language, and that's how we create our own categories to start speaking about gardening, and the one that we should start building from our own trenches. So
¿No? ¿Sí?
who's next? Dulce, your microphone's off. Sorry. So here's an example of how we use drawings, illustrations to promote science, like in the case of how to have pollination and of your plants. And this is the type of dynamics that we do. We use music, we use drawings, we use art, so as to integrate science, the culture of cannabis. And there's a picture of people who have been part of the project throughout time. And this is what we want Terraza to be, a place where girls can approach us to ask, to learn to grow, to smoke, to learn to do ointment and do self-supply. And so that there is a safe place in which we feel free to share our knowledge without being afraid that we will be judged or we will be somehow being harassed. We also believe that we need to take advantage of the full plant and inviting people to teach them what the plant is like, how it is used, how or when you can use it, and in this way to introduce scientific knowledge to all of us, so that this is not left as something that it's in the hands of a few, because this has happened with other workshops. People can approach and say, I didn't understand the science before, I thought it was good, it was bad for the environment, but, or I was bad at biology, but when you explain that this is a flower, this is a plant, this is a leaf, this is how it works, and you teach them other ways of learning outside the usual student circles. This is when people get it, they feel confidence that they can learn things and they can use this knowledge and teach others. This is something that is good when you share science, when people understand how things are done, how is it that we create knowledge. And at Terraza Güera, this has been something very positive. When people come to us, see how we are creating knowledge, how we are creating the ideas, and that we can share this in different ways using music, illustration, gardening, videos, the way in which I dress, the way in which I speak, the way in which I present myself on Instagram with people, the way in which we talk to one another as consumers. That has all been the main access of what Terraza Güera is all about. So literally we were transformed into a cartoon. That's us, the cartoon. So this is another way in which we can create other connections. We've also collaborated with other efforts like cannabis fighters, because cannabis is good for sports. Sports are not enemies of cannabis. Michael Phelps, for instance, who was an Olympic winner, he's a consumer. And this is part of Terraza Güera we're also trying to do. We're trying to connect with all of the people who wish to collaborate with us, and in whatever way they choose. This is a workshop of ointments, and this is Pedro 420. And in this network of collaboration in which we create a new cannabis culture, some people, this person, he's a psychotherapist. He lost a lot of his patients because of the pandemic. So he's now helping us with workshops. He's explaining the psychological benefits of medicinal benefits of our own minds. He is also adding the teaching of how to use this correctly. So this is all works together because we have been able to create links and bonds, and this is what we want to do. This is with the Punto Rojo Brewery Company, with Irene. This is Mariana, who taught us how to make beer, how to work with the different types of materials and beer. And this is where we started another type of economy, one that is different from the hegemonic that is imposed on us, in which we are using bartering or other ancestral practices instead of using currency. And this is how everyone can create a network. And if in the future we want to change things, we want to change it starting from the way in which we're consuming, so as to avoid paying the intermediaries. If we can create our own networks, which is the idea of Terraza Güera, marijuana is only an excuse for us to create It's larger network of self-sustainability instead of the neoliberal model that is so asphyxiating us. That's what we want to do, to connect with other projects. Here's another image. Girls? Yes, remember what we said about the radio collaborations that have been amazing for us, because that's given us a chance to reach other people and also to play with this thing that I like, this radio and hip hop and music, what is happening in the neighborhoods, in our daily lives. And now with the Morra Chambeando program, this has been a great space for us to share amongst women, to share our cannabis experiences, our musical experience, to smoke a joint, and to have this exchange of knowledge, empirical scientific knowledge, an interdisciplinary one, because I and myself, we are biologists, but in Moro Chambeando, they are historians and they bring some other types of knowledge and perspectives. And at the end, this is a place in which all of the knowledge got together and we could share them in a free way without being judged, without being harassed, and to feel that we could say things without any types of taboos. We're running out of time, but we are also working with gastronomy. For instance, here is cooking classes with Guadalupanes. We're baking bread there. And it's very interesting to see how the adults are so scared of smoking because they were taught that that was the devil, but they don't have a problem with eating marijuana. That's good, because eating marijuana could even be more powerful than smoking it. It's easier to smoke a joint than eat marijuana bread, but people find it's easier for them. That's something that we've discovered in the last few years. So we thank Emmanuel, because part of what we're trying to do with this critique of the hegemonic culture and to deconstruct one another, this is very helpful to use art. And this has been helpful so that more people can be empathetic towards the way of thinking and how we use our Instagram accounts to communicate, because that's the only thing that we can control. But we're always open to participate with others. We have participated in podcasts, in other Facebook from other people, YouTube, and other presentations. So we do this gladly. We only have an Instagram account because we believe it meets our needs, so that it can work with a type of self-cultivation, self-growth manual, so that people can watch videos and find the information on how different techniques work. We have had drawing contests, as Marina has said. We love arts. We love what artists do as a way in which to change our mental ideas and the perspective of consumers are. And what we're doing now, what we care the most about right now is, as Marina is saying, to start connecting with rappers. For instance, we have interviewed Yale. We also want to connect with some other types of projects, international projects, and to start creating debate tables and round tables in which we can share knowledge. And this is something that we did with this rapper Elianian. And it gave us a concept of how Colombia is using music and what she's doing to destigmatize and to also have more confidence, and so that people who listen to her and others can relate. And this is what other rappers are doing to help people relate. We like this a lot because marijuana is being used differently by the new generations. The young see it, if not more normalized, because that's a sad concept, they are more accepting. They are more accepting of marijuana. So this is what we're trying to do, to have cannabis conversations. And so, Ixel, I'll let you finish. So to conclude, we believe that the stigma of being a cannabis user is the product of a cultural hegemonic binary construct that was imposed as of the colonial times. The institutions that are guiding our countries are not looking at the best interest of people, and they reject other social cultures or other ways of living. And so Terraza Güera was created because of the need to provide medicinal solutions, but we want to propose the creation of a different type of gardening from the global south. And as my people said, we have used different methods to understand our historical, environmental, social context, to have enough tools to have a different model to that of the neoliberal foreign grower, and to have a better taking advantage of our own specific conditions to create methodologies that are good for the places where we live in. We want to create a conversation that receives feedback from the cannabis community, a place that is horizontal, free of patriarchal violence. And the best way in which we could do this is starting from the grassroots and by creating a cannabis gardening from the global south. So that's all we have. So thank you everybody for being here, for listening to us. And you can find us on Instagram as Terraza Güera. And you're more than invited to participate in our community and a network of self-growth. And let's get together. Thank you. Thank you.
Perfecto,
Muchas
muchas
gracias.
gracias.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Gracias a Terraza Güera
Thank you, Terraza Güera, for their initiative in this project. So now we're gonna take some questions, comments, or whatever you'd like to express, be it in written form or orally. So we're gonna be reading those here. So maybe we can start with the written question. There's already one there. Okay, let's start with this one. Nancy is asking, this is for the TriSpace project. The research you did at the El Salado street market, what kind of analysis did you do? Sociological analysis, economic, etc. Good afternoon. The TriSpaces project, well, we had the first presentation the other day. This is the second one. The kind of approach that we did at El Salado street market was not from an economic perspective. Like Lorena mentioned, we have a fairly interdisciplinary approach, sociology, ethnography, etc. What we were interested in when the project started is where we were trying to understand these practices where the youths appropriate the space at the El Salado market. And we wanted to understand the presence of consumers in the public space. How did it happen? And how do the different tensions happen with other actors in the public space? And then in this process, we ended up in El Salado, and we ended up finding this space with consumers, both men and women, mostly young people, would settle into the space and would be consumers. What we were interested in was understanding the transgression and how they understood the transgression. How much did they feel that they were transgressing, and what orders did they feel they were transgressing? How did they define their public space, and how did they feel they belonged in it? This idea of having access and a right to the public space. So our categories had to do with this, a socio-anthropological idea of understanding how they define themselves. How did they understand that condition as youths? How did they define their practices in terms of transgression or not? How did they feel, or how did they reclaim the right to enjoy the public space as marijuana users? So this is the kind of approach that we've had. It's not so much about, oh, we want to go there and prove what we believe. No, we are starting from what we find there. That's why we have privileged participant observation, interviews, really being able to understand what it is that the people are doing within these spaces rather than just going there with preconceived ideas and see if we could prove what we already had in our minds. So this has been how we have addressed the project in general. It happens in El Salado in particular, but we have extended it. We have followed these groups of youths who move around the east of the city, and they don't just take the street, they also think about other safe spaces for consumption and for making themselves heard and talk about their struggles and so on.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. ¿Alguien quiere decir algo, preguntar algo?
Anybody want to say anything else?
Si quieren poner la manita virtual, voy a ir anotando.
You can raise your virtual hand and I'll write down the order, okay? And then Ismail can meanwhile continue reading the written questions.
Nancy pregunta para
Nancy has a question for Dulce Tapia.
tratamiento especial.
Does the plant have some kind of special treatment? What do you mean special treatment? In general, how we treat the plants, what is it? Because, I mean, special treatment, yes, I mean, we track the plants, the substrate, how we choose the seeds, how we grow the plants, how we decide what kind of space they need, the kind of pot, you know. We do that here at Terraza Güera. We have comprehensive follow-up of the plants, and you don't need to buy anything from any grower store, right? From the global north. Here in our climate context and our geography, we have the elements necessary to have very beautiful plants that adapt to our needs. You know, if you want it for recreation or for medicinal purposes, we can do that from the fertilizer that we use. We have compost with worms. We use a lot of composting, and everything about that, creating the substrate, germinating, the soil, growing, that's what we use to treat the plants. I don't know if that answers the question. I don't know if that's enough.
Nancy, ¿dio respuesta o quieres que hable
Sí,
Nancy,
muchas gracias.
thank you.
Muchas gracias. Sí, lo que quería saber es
Yeah, what I wanted to know is
cuando la riegas, cómo la
how
cuidas.
often you
Mi hermano,
water
por
it, how do
ejemplo,
you take care
siembra,
of it.
no sé, nopales o
I, for example, grow nopales
tomates y cada
or
3 días en
tomatoes,
la noche para que no sientan el calor. No sé, tener ciertos
squash,
cuidados.
and you know, I need to take care of it in certain ways depending on the plant. That's what I talked about. Yeah, certainly. I mean, the plant is a weed at the end of the day and it's going to grow. But if you want to get the best results, you do need to take some special cares. We can find all of that in our Instagram account. We talk about when we water the plants, how we do that, and it's about having a commitment to see them every day, observing them, to understand their health and what they need. Thank you and congratulations for thinking of us women and the breast year and the clothing. I think that's fantastic. It's great that you have this initiative, especially considering women. Thank you. Thank you for listening to us. And finally, well, this is a space created for us, and we also teach some workshops for growing the plants. So if you want some information, you can use our Instagram. Thank you.
Muchas
See you.
gracias. Vamos a darle la palabra
Thank you.
ahora a Lorena.
Now, Lorena has the word. Go ahead, Lorena.
Está apagado tu micrófono.
Your microphone is off.
Súper, gracias.
There you go.
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias.
Good
Es muy
afternoon.
interesante
Thank
cómo
you.
están todos los exponentes que
I
han
think
participado.
All of the talks were very interesting. Thank you to all the speakers. I'm part of a female collective. It's called Cultivadoras Mexico or Growers Mexico. We are moms. We grow because we want to consume it. I also have some projects to fight discrimination against women and mothers, and I would like to integrate into your projects. I also work from a biologist. She's from Colombia. We work from breeders from Colombia, and we have research with Dr. William Courtney about the endocannabinoid system and the phytocannabinoids in the plant. So I just wanted to mention that and see how I might participate with my collective, how I could participate in the workshops and create this network of women. I'm really interested in harvesting the fibers for making clothes and braziers. We also have areas where we can grow. We just need some counseling in terms of getting the permits and other stuff. I'm a beginner in terms of growing. I haven't grown for a long time, but I'm very passionate about it because the cannabis plant is one of my ways to develop myself as a transpersonal individual. It helps me with my emotions. After I gave birth, I used cannabis. I also used psilocybin, and it's been great. My baby is really healthy, and that's what I wanted to mention and share. Thank you. Thank you so much. Of course, we are open to all kinds of collaborations and to continue to learn. I think the research that you're doing is very interesting. At Terraza Huera, that's also our objective, to continue to research and share knowledge. So find us on Instagram. It's the name back here. You can send us a message and we'll respond. Victor, Ali, and myself, we're always responding to the messages in the account. So just get in touch with us, tell us it's you, and we'll collaborate for sure. Thank you so much.
Gracias ambas.
Thank
Ismael,
you.
¿quieres
Now,
continuar con
Ismael,
la lista de
do you want to
escritos?
continue with the written questions and then Paola has the floor?
Sí, claro.
Sure.
Pregunta Adrián Jiménez.
Adrián Jimenez has a question for
Bueno,
Terraza
para
Huera.
Teresa Güera. Qué chido
It
trabajo,
says, what a
felicidades.
cool work
La
you're doing.
pregunta es,
Congratulations.
¿trabajan como
The
grupo
Growers Network,
político?
do you work as a
¿Cómo le han hecho
cannabis
con la
club?
parte legal? ¿Han
What
pedido
about the
permiso
legal
para
side of
trabajar?
things? Have you
¿Cómo ven
requested
que podría ser mejor con la
permits?
ley de cannabis que lo
How do you
limita a
feel
20
about
personas y hasta
the
50?
cannabis law that's coming,
Gracias.
which limits it to 20 people and up to 50 plants?
Sí, para dar respuesta a esa pregunta es
Okay,
muy
to
fácil
answer that
porque
question, it's
uno
very interesting.
personalmente está y sentía como el anarquista
I personally felt
y
like
ya
an
se puede decir que
anarchist,
mucho tiempo, ¿no?
and
Hace
we've been
muchos
growing
años,
for a long
entonces
time, you know.
en algún momento es una cuestión de complicidad,
It's
en
an
donde,
issue of complicity.
pero
We had
justo
always operated
unos
underground, but
años y cuando
last year
finalmente
we came to the
decidimos
light
que, bueno, vamos a salir a la luz,
and we
ya
thought
no se
about that,
decide
right? Like we're gonna come
si
out
hacemos
into the
algo
light. What
para
are we gonna
ganar
do? You
votos
know,
o nos hacemos muy populares
do we
y
become very
finalmente
popular
nos convertimos en
and
un gran movimiento
or
y
do we keep
volvemos a salir a la
fighting
luz
or
hasta
do we
que,
make
bueno,
a
se nos
large
caen,
movement?
nos caen a todos y armamos una red.
And
Afortunadamente, cuando empezamos con esta
you know, when
idea,
we started doing this and when we had this idea of establishing a large network,
hay un
we became
abogado
popular
muy
during the
conocido
pandemic,
de
and we
Colombia
saw a
que se
really
llama
cool lawyer,
y él se acercó a
Guajardo,
nosotros y nos dijo que nos podía
and he
colaborar con
approached
algo
us and said that he wanted to
para sacar
collaborate
este
with us
tema
because it seemed that we were doing
pero
something that was
buscábamos un
kind of
punto final para
pedagogical.
esto, que nos encontráramos
And
como ante el
he
público.
liked
En
that
ese sentido, sí, hoy
we had a
estamos
philosophy
trabajando
of
con
openness. And so right now, yes,
un amparo, ¿no?
we do
En el
have
2017 pues
an
cae
amparo, a kind of permit.
las cinco
In
demandas que se
2017, this started.
introdujo, digamos, esta ley que da
Some people
y entonces a partir de esas
did this
cinco
demand
demandas
with the
la
law,
gente empezó a ingresar
and
más amparos, nos pusimos a
because of
trabajar
people who
y
use
nosotros
this
pues somos
amparos or
expedientes en
protections,
conjunto
a
con
lot of
algunos
people started
legisladores
filing for that.
individualistas
And we did the same thing
justo trabajar
because
en las
we're
redes
against individualist
de
ideas.
Terraza
So
Güera a que más
we
personas
went online and
se sumaran
we
en ese momento.
tried to gather a lot of
Varios
people to
amparos
come into the movement so that we would
importantes
file many
por un
amparos
lado que
in
para
one
Terraza Güera
strike.
que pagaras menos dinero, es decir,
In
que
one
este amparo
way,
que nos
one
otorgó
benefit
en
was to make it
2017 nuestro
cheaper.
amigo Guajardo, que fue pues con
I'm
un
going
amparo
to
pues
link the
más
phone
barato
number of the lawyer
que
actually.
normales,
So
pues
since there was a
para
lot of
esta
people, it
idea
was
pues
cheaper.
están ahí pues
And
esperando,
also,
les pedimos, pero son personas muy
well,
éticas, ¿no? Entonces
the people who are there in charge of the law, they're not very ethical people, right? So they're just lazy when they receive a lot of documents. So they just stamp them and move on. So the more people they are, the less they're going to want to read them and the easier it is for them to pass them. So thanks to the lawyer Guajardo, we also have something medicinal. My mom personally had cancer and my family suffers from psoriasis. So this is a way to fight that, to fight the psoriasis by consuming marijuana. So we also have this medicinal side. We have the legal side covered by Mr. Guajardo. From the people at Flor de Gallo, we get the inputs that we need. And, you know, we want more people to join the initiative. Don't feel alone. Let's do it together. If you're growing something, maybe you're growing it at home, but you're not alone. It's a lot of people who are part of this network. And this might not be the best example, but it started in Spain, it moved to Uruguay, and I'm talking about the cannabis clubs. So what do we think about the regulation? We disagree with the regulation because the word itself, regulation, why do they want to regulate us, regulate our identity, the LGBT population? Why does the current government, progressive quote unquote government, and they're implementing these progressive models that, for example, in Canada, it hasn't worked very well. The taxes went up. Each apartment is autonomous in Canada, so they can manipulate the institutions in some ways. So this is kind of what they're trying to do with regulation here in Mexico. They want an institution that regulates everything. The last proposal for senators was that the people who smoke marijuana, we have to notify the state, and the state has to come into our homes to see that we have proper ventilation so that the neighbors are not affected by the smoke. And if the neighbor says, oh, my neighbor is smoking too much marijuana, then a psychologist has to treat you, you know? So that kind of regulation, we don't agree with it. We don't think it's dignified to live a life as marijuana users. So we don't agree with it. There are some things that we do agree with it. We want people to be free to smoke in open spaces. We want openness so that even in public universities, there can be scientific research about these topics, which is necessary. So no, we don't agree with the regulation as it is right now, because like the 420 colleagues say, they are prioritizing the market above the rights of users. If that is the case, we don't want that. Leave it as it is. We'll use the amparo to protect ourselves. Everybody will file one. And now, you know, the regulation has been postponed again. So we appeal to that, to the amparo. And then we can do that. They don't have to tell us how to do it, you know? And this is our opportunity. We are at an international economic crossroads. So we have to do that. And we have to do it from the bottom up, you know, with individuals, with collectives, with our neighbors. That's what we want. Thank you, Victor. Now, Paola will speak and then Ismael. Love to listen about the experience from every one of the collectives, especially the women from the Faculty of Philosophy and Literature. In recent months, we've been living very unpleasant situations, criminalization processes in our own institutions. And regarding this question, the question from Maria Isabel, he's asking about criminalization processes, especially in the context of literature and the work of Chicanos. Criminalization of Chicano groups, especially Pachucos at the start of the 20th century. Well, it's not so much about the environment of drugs. It does have to do with drugs, but also about the social spaces that Mexican migrants use when they arrive in the United States. And they are completely vulnerable and stigmatized. There are very interesting things. For example, Tintan. which is a representative of the Pachuco culture. He was one of the, he consumed marijuana and he was stigmatized. They called him crazy. He came from Ciudad Juarez. He was a Pachuco and he was stigmatized. And it's not just in literature. We have big contributions in the 60s, for example. We have Robert Rodriguez, Peter Coyote, Carlos Santana, which engage in this culture. They're part of the Mexican American culture. Not so much Pachucos, but Chicanos, certainly. And there are many things that are interesting about how they participate in these action groups, like the ones that you are doing yourselves. If you had American communities in your collectives, what would be their function? That would be interesting to think about, seeing these kinds of interactions and interrelations with consumption of drugs. I think that drugs have helped improve some interethnic relationships in marginalized areas in the United States, no doubt about it. And the other issue is, of course, there are contributions in music from the Pachucos. Music is also an important narrative. There are Pachuco singers and Chicano singers who popularized drug use. And here in Mexico, we had Oscar Chavez, who was very linked to the 68 student movement, and also about recovering the popular culture from Mexico and reclaiming it. And that has had an impact in the US as well. So there's a double bilateral dialogue. Mexico has also had an impact in the US in drug use, marijuana specifically. Popular consumption that was marginalized and stigmatized in terms of the Pachucos. So that's it. I think culture is everywhere, not just in literature. You can see it in many manifestations. So thank you, and it's great to hear you all. Thank you, Pau.
Ismael, adelante.
Ismael, go
Y
ahead.
regresamos con Estefanía.
And then Estefania.
Bueno, de hecho ya respondiste, Paola.
Okay, this one, wait, hang on.
Pablo
Oh,
García.
Pablo Garcia has a
¿Cuál
question.
es la misión y visión integral
What is the
del
comprehensive
proyecto
mission and
para
vision
regular
of the
la
Terraza Güera
regulación en
project when it comes to the regulation
Pues
in
creo
Mexico?
que eso ya estuvo expuesto en el proyecto y nuestra
I
visión
think we
precisamente
covered
es
that
una
in the
red de trabajo
project.
colaborativa
Our
para
vision is to
personas
weave a collaborative
quieran,
network
pues, no sé, autogestionar su propio
where
consumo, ¿no?
everyone who
Sí,
wants to
y con eso
self-manage their own
la
consumption can
regulación, pues
link
la
to
verdad no
us.
tenemos
In
ninguna
terms of the
perspectiva, para ser
regulation,
sincero, ¿no?
we don't really have a
Pues
perspective about that.
la van alargando.
I mean, they
La perspectiva es la que
keep
hemos
kicking the can
anunciado
down the
y que
road,
bueno, pues
and our opinion is what we've always said, you know.
rascándose el ombligo, viendo si
They're
regularizan
just
o no,
scratching their bellies,
cultivando, llevando
wondering if
sus
they're going
propias
to
semillas
regulate or not.
nosotros
But in the meantime, we keep
estamos
going, we
haciendo
keep
primero,
growing,
la distribuimos con
we
nuestros
keep
vecinos,
breeding, we distribute it with our
otros
neighbors.
compañeros ya están haciendo sus propias terrazas güeras,
Other colleagues are
ya van
doing their own
al
terrazas
domicilio,
güeras.
cambiamos flores.
A lot of people come
Entonces, nuestra misión y visión frente a la
to the
regulación
location, we exchange buds. So when it comes to the regulation, we have absolutely really no perspective because we try to stay beyond certain institutions who are simply harming us. They're giving us their back for many years. So while they keep their back turned to us, we don't have to chase them or ask anything from them, you know? We just want them to leave us in peace. That's it. And what was the other question, sorry?
Sí,
Or that was it, right?
Sí, solo eso.
Yeah, that was it.
gracias, gracias, Víctor.
Thank you, Victor.
Regresamos con Estefanía y luego
Now,
Ismael nuevamente.
Estefania and then
Adelante,
Ismail.
Estefanía.
Go ahead.
Pues mi comentario era como
I
para
have a
seguir esta línea
comment
de que abrió como Lorena, donde
related to what
hablamos
Lorena
esta parte
said.
de la maternidad.
She talked about
Y con
maternity,
esto quería como compartirles
and I wanted to share that
formando porro luchas,
in
estamos
women
juzgar
making
más como
joints
por
and
esta
making
esta
fights,
subsección que es la
we
sección
have a
de las
subsection
feministas,
for
que en este punto
mothers,
pues trabajan
cannabis
como en
mothers.
crear espacios de no combustión
And
ahorita en el fumatón de Catepec, pues
we
nosotros
work to
tenemos
create
experiencias
spaces
cercanas a
there,
la
like in
no
Ecatepec,
combustión, donde
the
mamás
smokeathon,
y bebés pueden estar en ese espacio.
and
Cabe señalar que
spaces
este es un
of
espacio
no
donde sí se
combustion where
necesita
mothers can be
voluntad,
with their
porque
babies.
pues obviamente pues México atraviesa un
And
espectro en el que pues hay muchos padres ausentes y pues esta
Mexico
incomprensión
is going through a situation where a lot of fathers are absent, and there's a lack of understanding for mothers who engage in cannabis culture. There's a lot of stigma And well, there's a lack of a gender perspective that thinks about mother, right? When the regulators talk about it, they think about regulating the substances and about the market and everything, but not about the mothers. And the financial situation of mothers is also important, and they are linked to the distribution of sales and sales of substances, but they usually have to go through their partners. Those are the ones who link them into drug trafficking, but sometimes they're left alone and they have to continue with the sale of the substances. So those are some of the things that we want to tackle. There are also women who don't just smoke because it's helpful in terms of their health or because they're caretakers with sick children. No, they also smoke for pleasure, for recreation. And there's discrimination and stigmatization to women, of women who smoke cannabis for pleasure and who are mothers. And we have always wanted to bring the mothers together, and we always invite them to come to these spaces. And we talk about feminist child rearing and these topics, and this is the work that we try to do. When it comes to the regulation, we hate this part about citizen complaints, right? People can complain about you. We hate that because if you're a mom and you're smoking, a neighbor can rat you out and accuse you, and you can end up in jail, you know? And we don't know what the regulation is going to look like in the end when it's finalized. So, and even if you have a permit for growing under this proposed regulation, they could go into your home and say, no, I don't like the way you're growing your plants, and take you to the police. And this would be even worse for mothers. Mothers are just seen as caretakers. That's it, under the law, right? It's only valid that they grow weed or have it if they're helping their children if they're sick. But there's nothing about mothers as recreational users using it for pleasure. So Lorena, yeah, you should look for cannabis maternities on Instagram and talk to them. They have an awesome project. They have spaces of no combustion, as they call them, where mothers can be with their children. And the Terraza Güera project is really beautiful. Also, here at Women Making Joints, there's a lot of growers, and sometimes we also exchange knowledge. We exchange flowers, and the space is not mixed, but we also want to invite everyone to search for these groups on social media. And let's broaden the network of growers, and that's it.
Gracias, Estefanía.
Thank you, Estefania.
Ismael, si hay
Now, Ismael,
Hay una pregunta de Víctor Callejas, pero solo dice, ¿el
there's a question from Victor Callejas. He's just asking for the contact information, I think, for Terraza Güera.
está buscando cuestiones medicinales. Entonces ya, exacto, ahí está. Ya lo investigará. Ok. ¿Alguien más, Ismael?
Okay, anybody else, Ismael?
No, ya no hay preguntas,
Not right now.
comentarios, felicitaciones.
Just comments, congratulations, and that sort of thing.
Quieren checar,
In case you want to read them, they're there.
Gracias. ¿Alguien
Okay.
más tiene alguna pregunta? Si no,
Does
podemos pasar al
anybody
siguiente
else
panel.
have another question? Otherwise, we can go to the next panel. If you want to raise your hand, go ahead. Otherwise,
Paso al siguiente
we can
panel
move
de
on.
exponentes. Bueno,
Okay.
pues Ismael, muchísimas gracias.
Okay,
por
Ismael,
moderar
thank you
este
so much
panel.
for
Muchas
moderating
gracias a
this
los demás
panel.
exponentes. Vamos a dar la palabra a
Now, I'm going
Yatsiri,
to
que ella
give
nos va a
the floor
dar
to
para cerrar
Yatsiri.
el último panel. Adelante, Yatsiri, gracias.
Gracias a ustedes.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Well, this is the sixth panel, the last one, and we will start with American fiction movies and the deconstruction of stigma. Before we begin, just something that speakers should be mindful of. please turn off the interpretation mode, lower right side of the screen and turn it off. If not,